I remember the guards brought Kaczynski in, and he was in shackles, and he was wearing a white jumpsuit. And he looked very small, and I was nervous. Okay, so, all right, I guess I should say something like, this is the interview with Dr. Theodore Kaczynski, and we're going to begin the interview now.
Well, here's exactly what happened.
The killer called the Unabomber has terrorized this country for nearly 18 years now. In addition to killing 3 people, his attacks have wounded 23 others, some seriously.
Ted Kaczynski is known as the Unabomber.
Those kind of guys are rare, and they're terrible. And Ted was terrible.
This guy was a pop culture icon. I mean, people wanted him to run for president.
I love this one. This is one of my favorites.
The Unabomber, to a lot of kids, was an inspiration.
He's inspired Hollywood movies.
And the blood will be on your hands.
Why would somebody try to kill you? Why would they do that to you?
I was shocked by the 3 years at Harvard University in an experiment.
It's perverse. It's sick. It doesn't work. But that's what Kaczynski was subjected to.
I think it takes a whole perfect storm to create someone as violent as my brother.
He was a good friend. Yeah, it was as if he was in pain, but I couldn't say why.
I never would have thought that my neighbor was sitting in that little cabin, creating bombs and killing people.
It was the most expensive investigation in the history of the FBI.
It was Linda who cracked the Unabomber case.
For me, it was easy. We had to do something.
Every journalist in the United States and in the world would love to get the first interview with Ted Kaczynski. By his invitation, he approached me. My writing and his writing were very similar.
I was practically alone in the world. It's just that I was mad.
He comes right out and says it.
I was going to work at hitting back at the system. Revenge.
Man, now what has man done? Man can't stand himself where he's told that he belongs. Man don't understand. Man blames everyone under the sun. Tell me, what is man become? Man can't help himself, don't know where he can run. Man can't run for help, can't stand anybody else. Man don't know where he's from, don't know where he belongs. How would man trade tomorrow for a time long forgotten turn?
No, it was simply anger and revenge, and I was going to strike back. Try not to get blown up.
What is man become?
You have an individual living in a little cabin by himself in essentially a wilderness area right outside a very small town. Doesn't have a car, doesn't have electricity, doesn't have power tools, doesn't have a job.
I figure he's one of those guys. Holed up somewhere, obsessing, reading every article he can find on the ills of society as he sees them, and, you know, pounding his fist on the table saying, I gotta do something about this. And the kind of guy that the neighbors say he was a little torque, but he kept to himself, kind of quiet.
I wanted physical freedom. I wanted to get away from cities and civilization. Because I just wanted to be a hermit. There's no doubt about the fact the reason I dropped out of the technological system is that, I mean, it reduces people to gears in a giant machine. It takes away our autonomy and our freedom.
The cabin is 10 by 14 feet. and is full of stuff. His heat is provided only by a pot-bellied stove. It's smoky, there's soot everywhere, it's dark. He's been doing a great deal of work in there. Apparently the work to construct these bombs has all been done in the cabin.
Good evening. We begin tonight with an emergency security alert issued in California today. The government says there is a credible threat that a passenger jet may be bombed. From a man the FBI calls the Unabomber.
He's causing all kinds of havoc. He's causing all kinds of public concern.
Police are swarming around the terminals at Los Angeles International Airport. Airlines have stopped loading the 200 tons of mail that leave here daily. It's being screened at a nearby postal facility for the possibility of letter bombs.
LAX is closed. The security goes to, DEFCON 4.
Security has been heightened, and with it, anxiety. The Unabomber's unique campaign of terror started in 1978. In 16 separate bombing incidents, 3 people have been killed, another 23 injured.
He's been going on for decades, it seems.
The FBI is warning everyone to look out for unusual packages.
If it appears suspicious in any way, shape, or form, then they should contact their local police.
Nobody knows who he is. It's creepy. It's creepy.
Not knowing is a hard thing. I didn't know who this was for 9 years. So basically, you're dealing with a ghost.
It's a killer on the loose, and he's got a wide range of targets.
There's a tremendous sense of public fear at this point. And there doesn't seem to be any clear sign that the task force is going to be able to stop him anytime soon.
More than 100 FBI agents are working the Unabomber case.
It was the largest manhunt in American history, and it was estimated to cost $50 million.
Is he a terrorist or a freedom fighter? Is he a revolutionary or a serial killer?
What you have are the facts of the case to work with. If you can figure out the why, you may be able to figure out who's doing it.
My motives are certainly not altruistic. I just don't like living in this damn system.
The interview I did with Kaczynski was the first interview he allowed 3 years after he was arrested. And it was a historical opportunity.
Is it being recorded all right?
What?
But is it being recorded?
Yeah.
All right.
Do you want to talk?
Pardon me?
Stay on the record?
Pardon me?
Do you want to talk off the record?
No, this is fine. This can be on the record. I get letters from kooks who think that I'm in cahoots with space aliens. No, really. I have had a few letters from people who do regard me as some sort of a cult figure. My personal preference is to be depicted truthfully. If I could be used as a symbol for promoting revolutionary activity, that's fine with me, because the main thing, in my opinion, to me, the main thing is to get rid of the industrial system by whatever means may be necessary.
I struggle with this because I don't know exactly what happened to Ted. I thought my brother was the best human being on earth, that he would change the world and do a great deal of good.
I didn't like the guy, but Dave loved his brother all the way through, I think. And his mother, of course, loved Ted as well, but I didn't. He may have been a nice person at some point in his life, but something happened and he became the killer.
I've spent much of my life trying to understand that. I mean, why?
The Unabomber's first bomb ended up at Northwestern University, based on a return address. The return address on the package was to a professor in the Technological Institute. The bomb was found in a parking lot.
It's got a label on it, it's got postage on it, it's ready to be mailed. So why wasn't it mailed? Why is it laying in this parking lot? We reconstructed it exactly how it was, and that's when we found it wouldn't fit through the door of the mailbox. So the bomber probably built it, got to the mailbox, and it wouldn't fit. And then what do? Well, you drop it and you leave.
And was retrieved by a officer from the Department of Security. It did partially detonate, which caused minor injuries.
No one recognizes this bomber. No one has seen this bomber's work before. The bomber is clever, but he's clearly not an expert bomb maker.
He's making these clumsy bombs with wooden ends to them, using black powder as a propellant. He's using this kind of very crude detonating system, match heads. They're not all that sophisticated.
Bomb 2 was sent May 9th, 1979 at Northwestern University as well. And this one was left on a table.
The bomb is built in a cigar box. It's not terribly large. It's simply left there for whoever is going to open it, and someone eventually does. It's got batteries and wires, and the explosive mixture is smokeless powder, the sort of propellant you would find in a firearm cartridge, and in some cases, match heads, which have been meticulously cut off of matches to fill a tube or a container. So that tells us, again, that we're dealing with someone who at this point is not terribly sophisticated in building bombs and delivering them. He's figuring it out.
After bomb number 2, he wrote, I had hoped that the victim would be blinded or have his hands blown off or be otherwise maimed. Well, live and learn. I wish I knew how to get a hold of some dynamite.
Most criminals aren't able to operate in such a vacuum. People know what they're doing, either because they boast about it or because they have people around them, or for whatever reason, they can't keep their activities that secret. He was able to. He lived in the middle of nowhere.
Here in rural Montana, for someone to live off the grid and be reclusive, be a hermit, it didn't raise any red flags to us, because if you want to do something like that, then rural Montana is the perfect spot.
It was not as secluded as I would have liked, but it's a beautiful little piece of land. It was in the mountains, and so I bought it, and so it's been part of my life for 25 years now.
Ted was the kind of person that you could meet, and you could know him for 25 years, like me, but never know any more real details about him than you did in the first few years.
All the neighbors got like junk cars sitting around, and he'd just go and help himself to whatever parts and pieces he needed to make his bombs, and it was like he didn't even think he was doing anything wrong.
If you use any common sense at all. Your chance of getting caught are practically zero. If there's nobody there to see you, the only danger is if you talk to somebody else and tell them what you're doing, and they don't keep their mouth shut.
You have quite a large boneyard with everything that anybody could need to do pretty much everything. There's hundreds and hundreds of feet of every kind of color and gauge of wire, and you're not going to miss something like that. Did I suspect Ted of taking stuff? No.
I think it started when I was about 5 years old. I was terrified to sleep in my room, and I was hearing something in the middle of the night, footsteps, rummaging around. I would run into my parents' room and say, "There's somebody out there," and they would just be like, "You're dreaming. Go back to bed."
The third bomb is a package which is sent through the mail, and it ends up on an airliner, on an American Airlines flight. This one is different in its design, and it is designed to function based on being triggered by an altimeter which is constructed from a barometer, such as you might find in a home weather station. So when the plane reaches a certain altitude, the device functions and cause an explosion.
The FBI says an American Airlines 727 with 80 persons aboard landed safely today at Washington's Dulles International Airport after a small bomb exploded in a mail pouch in the cargo hold. American Flight 444 en route from Chicago landed without injury to any of the passengers or crew.
It's rather sophisticated in the sense that the builder has created an altimeter, and of course where it was placed had the potential to cause mass casualties. So it's incredibly serious.
The plan was to blow up airliner in flight. Unfortunately, plane not destroyed, bomb too weak.
At this point, connections begin to be made. The U.S. government recognizes that they're dealing with a serial bomber.
He becomes known as the Unabomber, University and Airline Bomber. That's what the FBI tags the project as, Unabomber, or Unabomb.
My parents had a lot of, were frugal people, and they had a lot of money accumulated in savings and loan associations, and they were getting quite a bit of money from the interest. So from about 1980 to 1991, they used to send a stipend, a yearly stipend to me and my brother.
Ted's mother would send him money. He would say, "I've got some chest pain, and they say I should have some tests, but I don't have the money," and would, in a sense, scam her into sending money, which he would then use to make bombs.
Here's a guy who is targeting victims that he has no personal relationship with. It's unclear exactly what the pattern is.
Remember that I was isolated there in Lincoln. I had this little dinky local library to go to. Once in a great while, I would go to Missoula and visit the university library there.
The librarian who he befriended, she was unknowingly giving him books which he used to target people for his bombs.
And it was a pretty long list. He was going to start killing people as soon as the weather got better.
We don't know who's on the list. You have to wonder, am I next?
Some dots can be joined, but they are few and a little bit fuzzy. you have a bomber who's not terribly skilled at creating bombs and is clearly spending a great deal of time creating them based on the parts that he has to accumulate from various places, or in some cases make himself. So all of these things tell you something about the bomber. But is it at this point enough to lead to the bomber's identity? No, it's not.
I assumed that he might have been a GI that had had a real bad experience in Vietnam, coming home and just wanted to be off in the woods by himself. I saw him walking, and you know, he had a little knapsack hiking down the road, so I'll stop and offer him a ride. And he was very cordial, and he said, no, thank you.
This is a bomb that's different from the others. This is in a hollowed out book, a book called Ice Brothers by Sloan Wilson. It is accompanied by a letter, and the letter is intended to encourage him to want to read the book. So the book has been hollowed out and turned into a box to contain an explosive device.
Bleeding heavily from cuts in his face, left hand, and leg, Wood managed to walk next door for help.
There was blood all over his face, and his hand was really bloody. He was shocked that somebody would do such a thing, but he had no idea who it was from or why.
You talk to someone who's been blown up or who's had a loved one blown up, and it's awful. That doesn't go away. The fear and the anguish and the trauma that gets burned into their beings by an attack like that does not dissipate.
Hospital officials say that surgery to remove bomb fragments from his leg was successful, but Wood is expected to remain in intensive care for at least a few more days under police guard.
He wrote, "I feel better. I'm still plenty angry. I'm now able to strike back."
The task force is being asked to find solutions to all of this by catching this person before he can do anything else. The pressure was just incredible.
He's mailing things. There are components that get found at the scene. Why haven't the clues led to him yet?
We have a lot of evidence to work with. We have bombs to work with. We have a handful of letters from the Unabomber. A number of them have Eugene O'Neill stamps attached to them. Is that a message? Does it have some meaning to the bomber? Or is that simply what the bomber got when he went to the postage machine? We don't know. Is there significance to the fact that these devices use a great deal of wood in their construction? Does the bomber have some interest in wood? Or is it just happenstance?
We're trying to figure this thing out. We're trying to figure out where the clues might lead, what people in the investigative community already know. It's very frustrating.
Criminals often operate in the areas in which they are most comfortable. The first devices are placed in Chicago. So this is a person who is probably, if we're guessing at this point, probably from the Chicago area.
Our family had moved from an inner city neighborhood in Chicago out to a home in the suburbs. It was our first, single family dwelling. You know, my memories of growing up with my brother and my family were very, very positive, very warm memories. This one, I think is Dad, Ted, and myself taken, I believe, at one of our favorite hiking places, a state park called Starved Rock, where they had some lovely cliffs that we would climb. My father had really loved the nature. I think the love of nature, came to both of us through Dad.
One thing I found when living in the woods was that you get so you don't worry about the future, you don't worry about dying. If things are good right now, you think, well, if I die next week, so what? Things are good right now.
Our family valued intelligence, success in school, My brother had skipped a grade and then went through high school in 3 years. He was at Harvard University at the age of 16. And I remember one of my buddies telling another kid, hey, Dave's brother's really smart. He's in Harvard. He's like another Einstein. Well, maybe not another Einstein, but... And I said, what do you mean, not another Einstein?
He was a bit on the shy side, but definitely not antisocial. Once he got to know you, not once you got to know, once he got to know you, he could talk and talk. And we were talking about things that weren't trivial, they weren't bullshit. They were about what was right and wrong. And Ted was concerned and was more savvy than I was about corporate and governmental impact on the environment and on us. And some of the ideas that he articulated later, I distinctly have memories of talking about.
You can't live as a free person as a member of a large-scale system. There is another way to live, and you don't have to live the way we do in this system. I've been against technology ever since 1962. My last year at Harvard, 1962, was the year when I definitely decided I was against technology.
One roommate said that if they went down to the dining hall and saw him there and sat down with him, they never saw anybody finish his food faster and without saying a word would just leave. You know, so I felt hurt at first that he had just sort of ignored or obliterated our friendship, but I wasn't alone. I mean, he was not just shy. Now he was really antisocial.
Ted had come home from school. You know, I was getting a little more intellectual, reading more serious books, and I had some ideas, and I couldn't wait to tell my big brother about my ideas. But it seemed like, wow, he was very dismissive of my ideas. And he said, you know, Dave, real smart people have a sadistic streak. Almost all of them do. I was a little surprised by that. But the behavior he showed to me in putting down, dismissing my ideas, was what he had encountered at Harvard when people were demeaning toward him when he expressed his philosophy of life.
Mathematics was just a game, and I wasn't satisfied spending my life playing a game. Second place, I wanted to get out of the system and out into the wilderness.
When he resigned, his department chair said, gee, you know, I want you to stay. And Ted Kaczynski wrote in his diary, this fool thinks I want to remain at the university when all I wanted was a job to save enough money so that I could buy a piece of land to live in the wild.
So I went out to Montana, and when I went through Lincoln, there was a little sign saying real estate outside. I said, what do you have around here that's really secluded?
Wow, Ted, great, go for it, you know. This is wonderful. You're your own person, you know. You're doing what you're living in the way that you want to rather than in the way other people expect you to live.
You know, up above my cabin, there used to be a beautiful grove of old growth trees, you know, trees hundreds of years old. And there is a guy who's a neighbor of mine, Butch Gary. And this guy he's a real bastard. He runs a sawmill. Just spews this filthy pollution into the air, not to mention the noise pollution from his engine. And the guy is not only a logger and sawmill operator, but he's a particularly irresponsible one.
So back behind here is the road in which Ted would use to leave his cabin and walk or bicycle into town. And every time he would do that, he would pass my father, Butch Gehring's sawmill over here on the right. The sawmill is very loud and probably very disruptive. It's almost like a very loud humming as a log would go through the saw. And so that was constant all day long while the mill was active. Ted probably would have been very irritated to hear that noise.
My intention was to put him out of business once and for all.
He sanded the sawmill, putting sand into the engine so that it just goes through the entire unit and shuts it down. And they had to repair everything to be up and running again, and it was a huge cost. My dad, well, there was nothing really he could do. He thought it could have been, you know, some kids playing a prank. I mean, he just didn't know who did it.
There were those little times when I realized that there was a whole side to this person that I did not know. I just shudder to think how I had unknowingly helped him do the things that he did that were so heinous. Ted was actually at his home cabin, and motorcycles went riding real loud, real fast, and he was livid, furious.
They would ride their motorcycles on the road that was supposed to be closed, that sort of thing. They just didn't give a damn. And after I figured I had about as much as I could take of that, I picked a nice rainy day when no one would be around. I went over and took an axe to their cabin. I did them quite a bit of damage.
I mean, somebody was very angry. He didn't break the door in to gain access. He chopped a hole right through the wall.
He went in and just destroyed their cabin and then took a poop in their tub and left.
Normally when I did monkey wrenching, I made sure to do it far from home so that, you know, I wouldn't be a suspect. So then about a week later, 2 sheriff's deputies and a game warden came to my cabin and knocked on the door. And they asked me, Ted, you cover quite a bit of territory on foot around here, don't you? And I said, yeah, I do. And they said, have you ever seen anybody doing any damage to any buildings around here? And I said, no.
He took a risk, you know, looking back now, of being caught. The sheriff came and talked to me. He knew that I knew Ted, and he said, well, do you think that that friend of yours, do you think he could have done that? And I said, oh, no. I said, he wouldn't do, you know, he's got his quirks, we all do. And I believe I was instrumental in getting him removed as a suspect.
The FBI prides itself on being able to solve big crimes. And a lot of the way they do that is you get tips. You get information coming in. It's not so much you knocking on doors. You got to know where to knock on doors. And they're not getting the door knock tips. It's not coming to them. It's driving them nuts.
The FBI is just incredibly incompetent. I mean, you wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't have believed it before I saw my case from the inside, how incompetent these people are.
It's not unusual when a serial killer is apprehended that the police had already interviewed him once or even twice, right? They have an eye on a group of people. Ted Kaczynski never showed up on that kind of radar.
No.
Does your commitment to undermining the techno-industrial system come from a sense of duty, a sense of obligation, or is it more personal?
One of the things that's very interesting about Kaczynski is the personal is political. Everything that he's writing about and talking about in the abstract is also related to very concrete experiences that Kaczynski has had.
I hate the system, not because of some abstract humanitarian principle, but because I hated living in the system, and I got out of it by getting into the mountains, but the system wouldn't let me alone.
It is frightening, sometimes, you know, terrifying to find out what he was doing.
We had this logger that was learning to log with Belgian horses, so they're huge animals. And when he brought the logs off the hill, it tore up the grass. And so one day Butch said, go seed that area up there. And Tessa was maybe 3 years old. And so I was up there seeding, and the trees were about 3 feet high. So she was just a toddler, and she would disappear into them. And the hair on the back of my neck went up, and I thought it was a mountain lion. And so I told her it was time to leave. But it turned out it was Ted. He had a gun on her. And I asked the FBI after they figured out it was Ted. He had written in his journals. He had written something about it would be easy to take the little bitch out, but then the big bitch could get away. Or if I shoot the big bitch, then the little bitch would be left on the hill. But it's too close to his home. And that's, you know, he didn't want to bring attention to himself. It's probably the only thing that saved us.
The next bomb was October 8th, 1981, and was found by a maintenance worker in the University of Utah, and was defused. So a bomb that is not detonated provides a substantial amount of evidence, a better idea of how it's constructed.
The design is essentially a can of gasoline with a small pipe bomb inside of it. Apparently, the intent is that the pipe bomb will explode and create a large flame out of the gasoline. It doesn't function that way because it's recovered intact, but it's very significant. Apparently, he's branching out. He has come to Utah. He shows no sign of stopping. There's no reason to think he will stop. And it's sort of a race against time now, whether he can be caught before he does another bombing.
Ted was sly because we would think he was holed up in his cabin, but he was in Salt Lake. He would come back and stay in the woods until he got all scruffy again, and then we would see him. I think he planned a lot of that.
So the device, which is mailed to Vanderbilt University, which is not opened by its intended victim, but by the victim's assistant, is significant in a couple of ways. It's mailed from Utah, so now we have another connection to Utah. It's also another design in that it's a pipe bomb, but the pipe in this case is a P-trap, a plumbing pipe that you'd find under a sink. So it appears that the bomber is still experimenting with different designs.
Fisher was the intended victim of a bomb sent to Vanderbilt University by the Unabomber, but his secretary, Janet Smith, intercepted the package opened it and was seriously injured when it exploded.
Your usual serial killer is hunting for women, hunting for young boys, hunting for vulnerable people on dark alleys or lonely roads. It's not someone hunting for scientists. That stands out.
There are computer experts now who are quite seriously, in all seriousness, they propose getting rid of the human race and replacing us with computers. They think we can download our brains, you know, like 50 years from now, they think we can download our brains into computers. And in this way, attain immortality as machines. And I think a lot of people, other than activists, will be upset by that.
Unfortunately, despite years of detailed investigative work and the extraordinary talents of the 3 law enforcement agencies represented on the Unabomber task force, we have no viable suspects.
Pressure to solve the case is coming from all quarters. There's political pressure, a lot of politicians weighing in, criticizing the task force for not having solved the case. You have all the victims and all their families who want to know why you haven't solved this case yet. What haven't we thought of? What investigative technique or program have we not undertaken?
He plans ahead carefully. He selects his targets. He is very forensically aware.
The bomber is clever. You can leave fingerprints on any of the components. You can leave fingerprints on the inside of the tape. There's simply lots of ways to have your fingerprints appear, and they don't. There are also lots of opportunities to leave hair behind. There's no hair found in any of these devices. Nothing stuck under a piece of tape.
If you look at these minute traces they get at a crime scene, it's much less effective than they pretend. And add to that the fact that the FBI lab is incompetent.
Professor Diogenes Angelakos remembers he was in the faculty lounge of the electrical engineering building when he saw a package sitting on the floor.
And it took all the flesh off these fingers and left just the bones in the upper part.
Frustrating that I can't seem to make a lethal bomb.
The 1982 Corey Hall device contains a note. It's a very short typewritten sentence. Woo, W-U, it works. I told you it would, RV. Now we have potentially a clue or potentially an intended red herring, but it has to be run out in either case. You try to find people named Woo, do they know anybody who has initials named RV? And if they don't, we still will try to find all the people in that area who have the name RV.
You could tell it was a guy who was intellectually enjoying this and is not stupid, because a lot of criminals are stupid, or at least ignorant, and they don't do things like the Unabomber did. They don't conduct their campaign of terror the way the Unabomber is conducting his campaign of terror.
It makes you ask, where has this person gone? What's happened now? So the possibilities you have to consider are that he's already some sort of criminal and perhaps he's ended up in jail or prison. It's just one more factor to add to the picture that you're trying to build, the picture you're trying to paint of this bomber.
I happened to be up doing some digging, getting some gravel, and it was about 5 o'clock. I remember it vividly, and I was going home. It was an explosion, and I thought, the sound couldn't carry from anybody mining on the other side of the divide. It was a mystery. It was a mystery that I never did solve.
Now the explosive mixture changes to ammonium nitrate and aluminum powder. You have to go to some effort to create this. In 1985, the Unabomber reappears, and he reappears in a significant way. 85 is a very busy year. If it was possible to ratchet up the pressure further, it did. I think fear is a good word for what the public is feeling. There doesn't seem to be a clear pattern that allows people to say, well, it won't affect me. So there are very few people in the United States who can say there's absolutely no chance that I could ever encounter the Unabomber.
Man, now what has man done? Man can't stand himself or where he's told that he belongs. Man don't understand